guy named Glenn Carl, who is a former CIA officer and one of the top counterterrorism officials during the Bush administration, is talking now for the first time about an investigation that the CIA launched on Professor Juan Cole of the University of Michigan. We've had Professor Cole on the show many times because he is one of the top experts in the Middle East in the country. Well, it turns out the Bush White House asked for an investigation of him for reasons that I will explain in a second. First, how did this go down? Well, Carl was asked by his supervisor, Mr. Lowe, to go and look into Professor Cole. First quote from Mr. Lowe, according to Glenn Carl. Quote, "What do you think we might know about him or could find out that could discredit him?" Fascinating. Again, I will tell you why in a second. They are looking to discredit him. And then Lowe continued to ask, but what might we know about him? Does he drink? What are his views? Is he married? So obviously they're not interested in this guy in terms of, is he a suspect in anything? No. He's just, as you'll see in a second, a guy who disagrees with the administration. And they're not looking into his ties with Al-Qaeda or anything like that. They're looking into, is he married? Does he drink? What kind of lifestyle does he have? And by the way, of course, there's no charges of Professor Cole doing anything wrong whatsoever. And by the way, the CIA is not supposed to be investigating American citizens. I mean, if you wanted to look into someone and you thought there was anything slightly wrong, you'd go to the FBI, not the CIA. This is horribly illegal. And so to Glenn Carl's credit, he says, I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. You can't ask me to do that. And by the way, if you're wondering about Carl's motivation, he has never said this story before, and the New York Times clarifies, and it's James Risen, one of the most respected reporters. He's the one that broke the warrantless wiretapping story. He's the one that broke the story about how we were not really chasing after Osama bin Laden except for 36 guys in Tora Bora. Okay, so some of the major stories over the last 10 years, right? So James Risen says he did not come to us. We had heard about this story from someone else, and we went to go confirm it with him, and he did confirm it. He's out of office now. So when Carl asked Lowe, hey, why are you doing this? Here was the answer, quote, the White House wants to get him. The White House wants to get him. This is Nixonian. This is outrageous. And they're going after him because he does not agree with their position, as you're about to see. So then Mr. Carl said to the New York Times, quote, I couldn't believe this was happening. People were accepting it like you had to be part of the team. So the idea was what was previously legal and illegal, who cares? We're way past that, okay? Now you just got to be part of the team, and we just investigate people in the United States, even though the CIA should not be doing that under any circumstances. Now, that was the initial investigation, and by the way, after Carl refused to do it, Lowe apparently did it anyway. There was a file, and then they asked Carl to deliver it to the White House. And he opened up the file, and he said that there were questionable things in it about his personal life, not questionable as in what Professor Cole was doing, but questionable as to why in the world they would investigate that. And he said that there were, quote, inappropriate and derogatory remarks in the file. He brought it to the person above Lowe, and that person said, oh, no, this is crazy. And he crossed out with red ink the things that were about his personal life, etc. So at least Carl's actions led to some protection of Professor Cole's private life. Again, the fact that the CIA is doing this, and his boss acknowledges it. His boss, not Mr. Lowe. Lowe, of course, says, oh, me? Oh, I had nothing to do with it. I'll give you his quote in a second. But the person above him says, yes, Carl did come to me with that request, and yes, I remember looking at a file, okay? Now, after that, there was another investigation, apparently. And this time it was by an analyst who was assigned from the executive assistant to the spy agency's deputy director of intelligence, John Kringen, very senior person at the CIA, comes to Carl again and says about Juan Cole, quote, have you read his stuff? He's really hostile to the administration. Well, oh, great. Then why don't we go after him then? I mean, this is going on with a straight face. The only guy who seems to be objecting is Carl. And so he can't believe they're doing this again. Professor Juan Cole had a funny quote about this when the New York Times asked him about it. He said, they must have been dismayed at what a boring life I led because they got nothing on him, okay? But what he was most concerned about was that they were doing this to other people. He said, you know, who else did they do this to? What did they find, and what did they release, and how did they release it? And why is the CIA looking at American citizens? Now, as to the motivations, right? Well, there we have some interesting things. When they asked Lowe, hey, why did you do this, or did you do this? He says, I have no recollection of that, and I certainly would not have been a party to something like that. That is a huge legalese red flag, non-denial denial. I have no recollection of that. When somebody says that, 8 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, that means they did it, and they're like, well, if you have the records, I'm not going to lie about it, but I just say, I have no recollection of, oh, you found the records? Well, I didn't remember it. He continued by saying, I remember the name as somebody I had never heard of and who wrote on terrorism, referring to Professor Cole. I don't recall anything specific of how it came up or why. In other words, yes, I definitely looked into him. So if you catch my name on any memo, I'll say, oh, see, I told you I kind of remembered him, but I didn't remember why we were looking into him. Not obvious lie. And you could tell from the words. Now, when you go to ask John Negroponte, who was the director of national intelligence, the top guy, did you guys look into Juan Cole? Here's what he tells the New York Times. He did not recall the incident, here we go again, he did not recall the incident, but that the White House might have asked others in his office about Professor Cole. That's it. They definitely did it. Okay, because Negroponte doesn't want to lie, right? So he's saying the White House might have asked about it, but I don't recall I wasn't involved. It was probably other people. So, and why did they do this? Well, the CIA's lame excuse, as they continue to deny the story overall, is, well, you know, we had invited him to some panels on terrorism and counterterrorism, and so we wanted to look into his background. Wait a minute, you had already invited him, so that doesn't make any sense, right? So what was actually happening? Well, right at that exact same time, end of 05 into 06, Professor Cole was up for a professorship at Yale. And the neocons did not like that because he was opposed to the war. And they wanted to make sure he did not get that position. And at that same exact time, there were editorials and writings and blogs and pundits on television all speaking out on what a bad person Juan Cole is. They said that he was anti-American and anti-Israeli. And their whole effort was, we don't want this guy to get a great professorship at Yale and have even more legitimacy. By the way, he's a professor at Michigan, which is fantastic. So too bad all you've done is make him more legitimate. But you know what happened? Of course, Yale didn't give it to him because there was a lot of pressure. So is it possible that somebody at the White House, a neocon at the White House, asked the CIA for Juan Cole's records so that they can go out and smear him on television and in the press? Well, it's not just possible. You see the article. It's almost certainly what happened. And whatever their reason was, if you want to put that aside as to why they did it, the fact that they did it is nearly indisputable and grossly illegal, horribly illegal. Will there be any consequence to this, any actions? None. This is likely the last time you'll ever hear this story. You think the Obama administration and Eric Holder at the Justice Department are going to go back to see if the CIA broke the law by investigating Americans? Oh, come on, don't be silly. They don't look backward, they look forward.